Haolam, Asher Kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, to engage in the study of Torah. Amen. Amen. So this week is the third Parshat in a four Parsha saga about the story of Joseph. And this is the longest story about one character in the whole Torah. I mean, Moses, yes, but we don't follow him. You know, it becomes the story of the people of Israel once, the plagues begin. And even then, his story is one or two parshiot, that's all. But Joseph's story is, so for 4 weeks, we're engaged in the story of Joseph. And most people know the story up to a certain point and never learn the rest of the story. There used to be this guy in Chicago named Paul Harvey on the radio, and he'd always say, and now I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. Oh, Marilyn, you remember that? Yeah.
Paul Harvey.
Yeah, there was a long time ago, but he always had the rest of the story, and it's the same thing in the story of Joseph. So before we go to the rest of the story, would someone like to do you know, or would someone who knows like to recap the story as far as the first half of the story, or the first, until Joseph sees his brothers for the second time? Does somebody want to just recap that instead of me? Nobody wants to do that. Ben, are you raising your hand? No, you're just no. Okay. So as we know, Jacob had 12 sons. Well, yeah. And his favorites, but were the two sons of his beloved wife, Rachel, who he had always preferred and loved more than anyone else. Joseph was the older one. Benjamin was a little boy at the beginning of the story, so he doesn't really count. When the story opens, Joseph is 17 years old. And his father, Jacob, and I want you to think about, why do you think this story is in such detail? What is the point of having 4 weeks of studying or reading about this story? His favorite, and he gives him this beautiful colored tunic or coat, Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you ever saw the musical. And you have to understand that colors and dye and color and clothing in the ancient world was only for royalty. Most people wore drab, brown, burlap, plain whatever, woven clothing, brown or beige or something. And here he had this beautiful thing. And his brothers were extremely jealous of him, number one. Number two, his father sends him down it says that Joseph used to basically tattle on his brothers. He would report to his father what they were doing. That made him even less popular. And once the story begins, the father sends him down to where the brothers, older brothers, are with their sheep to see what's going on, to go and see them. And he comes, and he is a very callow, unaware young man. And he tells them he had these dreams. He says, I had a dream where there were, 10 stars and a sun and a moon, and they all bow down to me, which is like his family bowing down to him. And he had it that, 10 sheaves of corn or wheat, whatever, and they all bow down to me. And they just can't stand him. And they say, let's kill him. Let's kill him. And they basically take off his coat and throw him into a pit naked, or just with a loincloth or something. And they want to kill him, but Judah says, no, let's not kill him. A caravan of Ishmaelite traders comes by on their way to Egypt, and he says, let's sell him as a slave, teach him a lesson. So they sell him as a slave. They take his coat, they smear it with kids' blood, and they go to their father and say, oh my goodness, we found this coat with blood. We think it's Joseph's blood. He must have been eaten by a wild animal, by a lion. Now, the commentaries say that the hope of the brothers would be, well, now that he's gone, our fathers will love us. Our father will love us. Our father will care more about us. But that's not what happened. Jacob goes into this huge grief-stricken, fugue. He's just a depression that lasts for years. They destroyed him. He can't get over it. Meanwhile, Joseph is sold in the marketplace to an officer of the Pharaoh named Potiphar, and he works really hard. And so what we see is he's not the spoiled young man. He's got to work, and he works very diligently. But what happens is, does anybody know the sexual part, Penina? You're muted.
Okay, I'm going to go first to your question of why is it that the story takes such a
Long time. Yeah.
part and takes such an importance. It's because there is a change in history. And every time that there is a change in history, the son or the person involved is a son of a woman who was barren before, to give him importance, to give him weight, like he's special. And he was the first of Rachel who was barren.
Right.
So the same thing happens with Samson. You give him a whole book. His mother was barren because you switch from autocracy to monarchy. After Samson, they didn't want any more judges. They wanted a king.
Right.
So there was a whole switch. So Joseph now is beginning an era of the Jews in Egypt. Eventually, his family is going to go down to Egypt, and they're going to be given a part. Supposedly, it was the best part. But the point is that it's opening to the Exodus later on.
That's very interesting. I think that's one of the reasons. I think you're absolutely right. I also think another reason, as we look at in addition, is that every aspect of human nature is revealed in these 4 chapters. Every aspect,
right,
good and bad, high and low, is modeled or expressed, or we see it through the characters and their experience. And so we can learn, every one of us can identify with something, someone at some point. So do you now want to talk about Potiphar's wife and what happened?
Yeah, she was making advances to him and he didn't want to. So he was thrown in the jail because she told a lie. She said that
she accused him of trying to rape her because he refused her advances.
Right.
And he was thrown in jail. Now, there he meets King, the Pharaoh's butler and the Pharaoh's baker, and they each have dreams. Now, I want to point out something that I've never heard any commentary say, but it happens again in this chapter and before. Joseph has dreams. He has prophetic dreams, and he can interpret dreams. But Jacob also has dreams. Jacob, his father, had the dream of the angels going up and down the ladder, and he's about to have another dream. So for some reason, it's not pointed out that both of them had this psychic ability, this second sight, but it seems like Joseph used it more for good or more beneficially than his father. So he hears these 2 dreams. Does anybody know the dreams that the baker and the butler told him? Does anybody know? Okay, so the butler says, I had a dream that I was carrying some grapes on a tray, and they were like, what is it? I can't remember it exactly because I didn't review this part, but he has grapes on a tray and they go into a cup, and the baker has 3 loaves of bread on his head, and these crows eat the bread off of his hat. And so he says to the butler, you're going to go back to work in 3 days, and the baker, you're going to be hanged in 3 days. And that's exactly what happens. And when the butler goes back to the Pharaoh, he says, please remember me here. But he doesn't. 2 years pass. He's in that horrible prison for 2 years. And now the Pharaoh has dreams. So dreams are very big in this story. Joseph has dreams. Pharaoh has dreams. So that's very interesting. And does anybody know the dreams that Pharaoh had?
Oh, he had the cow one.
All right, Miriam. You have to unmute.
Can I say something real quick?
Of course.
Rachel was also a seer.
Rachel.
Yes.
Where do you get that from?
Well, she just Now I'm not gonna, I lost my train.
I mean, I know in the Red Tent, she has a lot of interesting qualities, and I like them, but I know that's the novelist's depiction of her, but I'm not sure where you get that Rachel was a seer but if you remember, let me know.
I will.
Okay, Miriam, did you get able to unmute? No. Just press the little mute button. Yeah.
Okay.
What was the dream?
Dream was that he dreamt and there were 7 fat cows grazing right near the riverbank. And 7 very thin cows emerged. They swallowed up the fat cows, but they did not get fat. They remained thin.
And then he had a second dream
about stalks of corn. And there was a stalk of corn that was very full and blossomed. And,
7 stalks.
7 stalks, and then 7 very thin stalks devoured the fat stalks, the blooming ones, but they never did get heavier.
Right. So nobody could interpret the dream. And finally, the butler says, oh, there was this Hebrew boy in the prison, and he interpreted a dream for me and for the baker, and they came true. They were true. So get him. So they pull him out, and in the description, it's like they clean him up and they give him clean clothes. They shave him. So you can imagine how filthy, bearded, ragged he was down there. And now maybe he was 20, or something. And the Pharaoh tells him the dreams, and he says, this is what they mean. Does anybody know what they mean? Anybody remember, read, know? Come on.
7 years of famine.
Who's talking? Sukasa, you know.
7 years of feast and 7 years of famine.
7 years of plenty, incredible plenty and bounty, and then 7 years of famine that will be so terrible that you won't even remember the 7 years of bounty. And so Joseph says, my suggestion is that you store grain during the 7 years of feast or bounty, so that you'll have to eat and sell, and you can even sell it to, it's going to happen to the whole region, and you'll have all these stores of grain. And the Pharaoh is so impressed that he raises him up to become like second in command, gives him a robe, gives him a ring, gives him a cloak, a ring, and whatever. And he is second in command, and he's overseeing this. So
Rabbi, excuse me for a moment. I just want to say that Joseph said before he interpreted the dreams, if I can interject,
of course,
he said both dreams mean the same thing. You only dreamt one dream, even though they were in 2 different words.
Right, the same message. And also he said, it wasn't me, it was through God. Joseph was a very humble guy in that he always attributed his gifts to God. He didn't take credit for it. He was a very humble young man. And we can probably assume that having been brought low and being in that prison for all that time had made him reevaluate his life and his priorities. And it was a miracle to him that he was able to get out of that prison. He could have been there for the rest of his life. So now he's very high, and the 7 years pass, and now there's 7 years of famine all over the land, including the land of Canaan. And who shows up but his brothers to buy food? In Canaan, they are starving as well. And the father says, go there and buy food. And so when Joseph sees them, he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. Obviously, they probably thought he was dead. So here's a question that is asked by the rabbis. I wonder what your opinion would be. There's no answer. So we're speculating. They don't have an answer. Why did Joseph never contact his father to tell him he was alive? Why did he never? Because the first thing he says is, oh, do you have anyone at home? And they said, we have a father. And he goes, oh, and we have a brother. They didn't take Benjamin with them. but he's trying to find out if his father's alive, what's going on, but he never contacted anyone to say he was alive. What would your opinion be of why he might not have done that?
I am so interested in this topic because I just don't understand it. But some of the reasons I think are that it was too painful for him to even think about the family. Two, it was just incredibly difficult for him to think about what happened. And the more time that passed, it was easier for him to put it behind him. Although he could have easily sent out a servant to, just out of curiosity. So I really wonder also about.
Okay. Yeah. Lorraine?
I think that he could have wanted to spare shame on the brothers, spare embarrassment on those that did that to him. And also on the Torah, it says that his first son was named after.
Uh-oh, you froze.
I think along these lines of because I have forgotten where the land come from, or like what has caused me pain. So I don't know if something related to that he just forgot about, then the pain he left that behind, right? But those two things come to mind.
One of the commentaries does say he didn't want to cause shame on his brothers, or it would have destroyed the family if Jacob had known that the sons had lied and killed, sold him into slavery and lied and said he was dead and let him grieve all this time. They didn't know what happened to him. So that is one interpretation that I have read. Just before I go to Penina, anyone else have a speculation? Yes, Benjamin. And then Brad.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, very simply, maybe he thought they were all in on it. The father too, and the brothers, and just thought they were all in on it and didn't want to, he's okay, didn't want them to know.
Even though his father had favored him above all the others?
The mom, just figured if the brothers did it, the father may have known. The
father may have known, and maybe pushing that further, no one ever came looking for him. So in that respect, I guess that's interesting. Okay, Brad?
Well, this is along the same lines. Why would Jacob send him out initially there to find the brothers, knowing that the brothers were angry at Joseph? There may be some resentment there on Joseph's part.
Okay, yeah. First of all, Jacob seems really obtuse. I got to tell you. So I don't know if he knew. I mean, he's so, the way he dealt with Dinah, and he didn't know what to do when his son slaughtered the town of Shem. And so that's possible. But do you think as parents, even if there's sibling rivalry, that your one child or with brothers would kill or do something like that to the others? I mean, maybe it was, you think he put him in jeopardy? What you're saying, Brad? That's interesting, because I didn't talk about this, but in the text, when Joseph is looking for his brothers, this stranger appears and says, oh, they're down there, and directs him. And some midrash says that was an angel, because the whole thing was a divine plan, that he would be sold so he could go to Egypt so he could save his family or whatever. And that was the dream, that they would bow down to him. But that's interesting that either way, he did put him in jeopardy, whether he intentionally or, ignorantly put him in jeopardy. So I can see that as a possibility. I agree with you. Okay, Penina.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think there is a conflict here of emotions, and I was bothered also with the question, why didn't he ever contact his father to let him know that he's alive? I think maybe he didn't want to reveal his own identity as a Hebrew.
They
But
knew he was a Hebrew. They knew he was a Hebrew.
they knew, okay. Yeah, he was given Pharaoh's daughter, and yet he named his children in words that are expressing their Hebrew.
Yeah, but he didn't get Pharaoh's daughter. He got a woman named Potipharah, and some say it was Potiphar's daughter. His wife's name was Potipharah, but she was still royal, noble. He did have an Egyptian wife who was noble, a daughter of Potipharah. Her name was Asnat, actually.
Okay. So, but the man was okay. I don't know. I really don't understand it. Like I said, I think it's a mixed emotion. On one hand, maybe didn't want to reveal that he's actually from the Hebrews, and on the other hand, he names his son Hebrew names. So I can't really explain it. I think it's a confusion of a person who lives maybe in a diaspora, that for one moment you want to be a good Jew, and on the other one you want to assimilate with the people that you're with.
I think that's very interesting. I think there's something to that. Brad.
Well, I was going to talk about assimilation as well, where he's brought into Pharaoh's household. He's given an Egyptian wife. He's put in a position of authority in Egypt. I mean, he's become assimilated, and as assimilated, he turns his back on his past.
Yes. Okay, Miriam. I like that. Yeah, I think there's something to that also, that you'll find out when we get to our text that he's a little embarrassed by them, actually.
Susan, ever since you said that every emotion is expressed, and these 4 parshiyot, all about one character of the Bible, that was so important, because we saw a new development in history. We saw a new Pharaoh. We saw so much happening in this short span. But what I am not surprised that he sent Joseph in what we might call harm's way to his brothers who hated him, because like many parents, Jacob did not have the insight that his brothers hated him. Like many parents who are dense, unfortunately, they could be brilliant, they could be professors, and they could be an example of bad parenting. This in the Bible shows us a huge example of bad parenting.
I totally agree with you. So let's move on. He sees his brothers, they bow down to him, just like the dream of the stars bowing down. And he gives them food, but he sells them the grain, but he says, don't come back without the younger brother. I want to see if you ever come back. They go back. They don't want to do it. Time passes. They have no food. They have to go back. And Judah says, we have to bring the younger brother. And Jacob says, no, I can't. What if something happens? I've already lost Joseph. I wouldn't be able to get over it. And they say, I promise you, I'll bring him home. They go there. Again, they bow down to Joseph, second time. They get the grain, but now Joseph, and we're about to start the Parsha where it begins. Joseph tests them. What kind of men are they now? And he puts a silver cup in Benjamin's grain bag. And when they're on their way, he sends all his, horsemen to bring them back and says, one of you have stolen from me. And they go, no, we would never. And they were searching you, and they find the cup in Benjamin's bag. And now the brothers, he's going to be in prison. The brothers are freaking out, because if they lose this other brother of Rachel, the other son, their father is going to die. So now we're going to look at, this is where last week's stopped. And now Judah is going to beg. Now, Judah is the one who brought the smeared coat with the blood to Jacob. Judah is the one who said, let's sell him. So Judah feels horribly responsible for what happened. So now let's look at this. We're share screen. Here we are. Share. And where's everybody? Okay, let me just do this so I can see you. Pull this down. I want to see everybody. Okay, hold on. How do I do this? All right, good. Okay. So Judah goes up to him, and it's Vayigash. He goes up to him, and I just want to say, it says, then Judah went up to him, and the commentary said he physically went up to him and emotionally like went up to him, like just so full of emotion. When I said this is shows every aspect of humanity, I don't mean just Joseph. I mean through all the characters. They all express so many different things. So who would like to read this part, the first part, the first, 5 or 6 verses? Who would like to read? Somebody? Susan. Okay.
And Judah went up to him and said, please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh.
Okay, so when he calls himself your servant, just so you understand, he's referring to himself as your servant.
As Joseph's servant.
Yeah. Okay, keep going.
My lord asked his servants, have you a father or another brother? We told my lord, we have an older father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him. Then you said to your, oops, hold on, where to go? Oh, then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him.
Okay, your servants meaning all the brothers. They're referring to themselves in the third person because that's how you refer to yourself to royalty.
We said to my lord, the boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you do not let me see your faces. My father, we reported, my lord's words.
When we came back to your
servant. I'm sorry. It didn't make sense. When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my lord's words to him. Later, our father said, go back and procure some food for us.
Moving you, so this can go here. Okay, go ahead.
What's that? We answered? Okay, we answered, we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down, for we may not see the man's face or show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, as you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but one is gone from me. And I said, alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow.
Okay, so this is the first time we're actually hearing the grief from Jacob's point of view. We've never heard it before. We've only heard that he was upset, but now they're reporting this is what their father said. Sheol, it's Sheolah in Hebrew, is the very first kind of afterlife, and it's really an underworld mentioned in the Torah. Sheol was, and there's no like Olam Haba, that's Talmudic and Kabbalistic. Sheol is kind of like Hades, where you're like a ghost, but you still live in this underworld. And we know that in the time of Saul, he actually had a witch bring Samuel, the prophet, up from Sheol. So there's this idea in the early Torah times that when you died, you went to a shadowy underworld. Like you didn't go to heaven or any kind of place like that. So that that's what Sheol is. And I think this is the first time it's referred to in the Torah is right here. Does anybody have any questions about that or comments or something? So Sheol. Okay, so who would like to read now? So we're getting the backstory now about their feeling and their dread and their fear of what is going to happen to their father. And how is this different from when they first did this to Joseph? Let's say
opposite. What do you mean first did it?
When they sold him, how did they consider their father's feelings?
No. I mean, it's opposite. It was interesting to me that they're repeating what Dad said, that he had only two sons with his one wife. Speaking of Jacob's being totally clueless and inconsiderate in what they're reporting, that's pretty awful.
You're right. That just went right by me. He says, as you know, my wife bore me two sons. What about their mothers? What about their mothers? There were three other mothers. And one commentary says Judah at this point just accepts his father for who he is. I mean, they always thought he would change. He never changed. So talk about someone not really growing from grief. We expect you to gain wisdom from grief or from age, but it's not necessarily, just because you're old doesn't mean you're smarter or you're wiser if you don't learn from what happened. So he's still hurting his own sons with his words, at least, and his behavior. Okay, Susan, why don't you read?
Where are we now?
Now, if I come to your servant, my father.
Oh, yeah, right. Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servant will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief.
Okay, so you're gonna kill my father if you do this. Another commentary says that in this speech that Judah, he's not done with it yet. He says my father 17 times. He's saying my father, my father, my father. I mean, now their father's grief, their guilt, whatever it is, he's not thinking of himself at all, but his father's emotions are paramount in his mind and heart. Okay, keep going.
Okay, now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to.
Now he's talking about himself. I, your servant, pledged myself for the boy to my father. That's what he means.
Saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my Lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. And interesting, now they're fulfilling the dream of the bowing down and serving as servants.
Exactly. And he's saying, take me instead, take me instead. And so this is the one who Joseph knows sold him. So he sees a huge transformation in his brothers, at least Judah with that. Okay. Just finish the last sentence.
Okay, so how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father.
Now, I have to say, in terms of writing, this is so poignant and full of emotion. It's very unlike the rest of the Torah. The Torah is usually very sparse with feelings and descriptions, and even when Abraham sacrificed Isaac, they never described how he felt. We hear very little, and here this is this long, emotional, poignant speech from Judah. And now we're going to hear Joseph's side. It's almost, there's no proof of this, but it's almost like it's a different writer, or the writer's gotten better.
I was going to ask you about that because it is so, it's almost opposite. It is so different. And this is not the only area that emotions are expressed. It's expressed everywhere. It is so full. Have you seen anything that this would be by a different writer? They have Deuteronomy as a different
Right.
writer, but I don't know about, I mean, this is opposite of what we've been saying.
It's like it's also like a story that you feel has been told and embellished, and that the writer identifies with all of the feelings because it's so, heartfelt, and such a variety of just the whole range of spectrum of human behavior and feelings, which we do not see in the Torah anywhere else, really, at such length. I mean, maybe here and there there's a phrase or something. Panina.
I think you do see it. You see actions that are following as a result of what they felt. Like what Moses with the stick with the water when he hit the stone. You see actions that are happening, and those actions were a result of those feelings. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the situations happening.
I agree with you.
We cannot tell from this, from the results, that there was no emotions in other areas. I disagree on that.
There were emotions, but the writer didn't go to such lengths
right
to describe.
But the actions that happen couldn't have happened unless it was triggered by emotion.
Of course, but here we're really seeing how can I can't face him, and this story, my father will die. Okay, so let's move on. Now we have Joseph's side of the story. So who would like to read? Come on, you're all wonderful readers. Okay, Merle.
It's too small. It's too small for me to read, and I can't get it bigger.
Okay. How about Brad? How about you?
Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him. So dumbfounded were they on account of him.
Now it's interesting, in Hebrew, it doesn't say, "Is he well?" It says, "Ha'od avi chai." Is my father still alive? So I don't know, because they told him he was alive, but he says, "Is my father still alive?" Od chai. It's not, I don't know the answer to this.
Well, and he also says, "My father," not "our father,"
Right.
continuing to distance himself from his brothers.
And go to the next, go on.
Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt."
So he has to say it twice. Ani Yosef, and then Ani Yosef, your brother, because they can't even fathom, it'd be like going to the White House. You're like, factory workers, and the vice president says, "I'm your brother." And they're like, who you thought was dead, or certainly, degraded to such a degree. They can't even say anything. Again, I feel this is so emotional and so in so many levels. And then he says what? Go ahead, continue.
"Now, do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you."
And then that's this thing about Joseph. He's a mystic. He sees God's hand in his life in a very real way with the dreams. And when he said that God gave him the ability to interpret, and he's saying this all was preordained. This was all part of a divine plan, that I was meant to come here. So don't be upset or approach that you did this. Keep going.
It's now 2 years that there's been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance.
It says, in a Gedolah, in a huge deliverance that God sent me ahead. So it's amazing that he doesn't even think about himself like God glorified me, God this. It doesn't talk about, it says, I was sent here to save you, which just elevates him beyond his brothers on so many levels. And okay, just read 2 more. So it was not you.
So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt.
Okay, so the rabbis and the commentaries don't know what this means. He has made me a father to Pharaoh. And it says, Simani la'av leparo, made me a abba, a'av leparo. So what do you think that means? He made me a father to Pharaoh. Does anybody have any idea what that could mean? Kimberly, do you have an idea?
I was wondering if it means that because he interpreted the dreams for the Pharaoh, that in a sense he's the Pharaoh's guide or counsel.
Oh, so you see it as father meaning like guide or, like that's interesting. Yeah, like your advisor.
Yes.
Advisor, like a father would be an advisor or a
Yes.
mentor.
Yes.
To Pharaoh. Oh, I like that. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
It could also be he's caring for Pharaoh in the sense that he's managing Pharaoh's everything in the land. A caretaker in a way.
You know, it's interesting. If you, I'm a big Anglophile and I watch all these English shows and everything. And when you're having tea in England, and even if it's a man, the person who's pouring the tea will say, shall I be mother? Shall I be mother? Meaning, shall I serve you? So for a man, shall I be father means, shall I be the server? May I serve you or take care of you in that way? So it's pretty interesting because they don't know what that means. So now Joseph says, and this is like how the Israelites came to Egypt. And he says, who would like to read? Lorraine, you want to read? Now hurry back to my father.
Now hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me without delay. You will dwell in the region of Goshen, where you will be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all that is yours. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, that you and your household and all that is yours may not suffer want.
Okay, let's stop for a minute. Mm-hmm. There's an implication here. There's an implication here that they were supposed to come for 5 years. For famine, and I'll take care of you, but not permanently. There's no, it's kind of, and also, again, you have to ask yourself, why didn't he seems to know all about his father, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds. Maybe, I don't know. He knew about him, even though he never contacted him. But he says there's 5 more years to come for 5 more years. So I think about Israelis who come to America. I mean, yeah, briefly, and end up never going home. Or I think about myself when I moved to LA. I said I'm coming for 6 months, and that was in 1988. They didn't plan to move, but they ended up staying there to their disadvantage ultimately. So that's pretty interesting, just to note that Joseph's saying, come for the 5 years and you'll be, I'm going to take care of you. Okay, so continue, Lorraine. You can see for yourselves.
Okay.
Here.
You can see for yourselves and my brother Benjamin for himself. Yes, you can. I think my internet may be spotty.
Okay.
Can you hear me well? Or
that it is indeed I who.
Yeah, I think my internet is spotty, or maybe it's on your end, but I can't hear you too well. Can you hear me well?
Yeah. You must tell my father everything about my high station in Egypt and all that you have seen, and bring my father here with all speed. And when he embraced, literally fell on his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. So he felt very close to Benjamin. Benjamin is now, separate from the other brothers, and he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. So they were not saying a word. Still, the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have come. Pharaoh and his courtiers were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do as follows. Load up your beasts and go at once to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall live off the fat of the land. Now, it's interesting. I read a commentary that even though the Israelites were later enslaved by Egyptians, we never curse the Egyptians. We never, compare them to anything negative. There's still some esteem or connection between the Israelites and the Egyptians and Egypt, even though they were enslaved, because they blame it on that one Pharaoh, that there was this beneficent relationship toward Egypt. You think about earlier, Abraham went down to Egypt, Isaac went down to Egypt, that it was a place of, it was kind of a mutual respect that, and even, on Pesach, we pour out wine to remember the Egyptians who suffered from the plagues. We don't really remember any of the other enemies of the Israelites. So we see that Pharaoh truly loved Joseph and was very generous, and that they had a very good relationship. Yes, Brad.
Well, I'm not so sure I agree with that.
Okay.
I think it's very possible to see that Pharaoh, in a sense, felt very threatened by Joseph. I mean, after all, Joseph had powers that Pharaoh did not have. He had the power to interpret the dream. So Joseph represented a threat to Pharaoh. And for that reason, Pharaoh did everything he could to tame that threat by bringing Joseph into his household, by giving Joseph an Egyptian wife, by making Joseph one of them. So I'm not sure that I would see this as a beneficent Pharaoh. I would see it as a very tactical Pharaoh, and engaged in the ancient hospitality code.
So okay, I can see your point. But pharaohs, however, were considered gods, and so you think he was threatened, or he just felt that Joseph was his kind of pet,
Because Joseph had powers that Pharaoh did not. He saw Joseph as a threat.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't agree.
Hey, Miriam, and then Sue. Yeah.
Am I muted? I don't see my picture.
Not muted.
Good. Okay, I don't agree with Brad, because that would make Pharaoh even a greater human being than he was. It would mean that he had such insight that if he felt threatened, then he overcame his threat. How many people, like I'm sorry to be political, like our ex-president, always felt threatened, always was jealous, and never had any insight or even knew how to overcome and become a mensch. Now here, Pharaoh, all to his credit, Brad, because I don't quite agree with you that he felt threatened, because that would make him a super person. It would mean that someone will say, I am jealous of that person. Therefore, I'm going to make him my friend instead of my enemy. That would be a very, very high form of humanity. And so I don't quite agree with what you.
That's interesting. I think Brad was thinking that he was placating Joseph to keep him on his side, right, Brad? I think that's what you're trying to say. But let me hear what Sue has to say.
I was just going to mention that Joseph is like a chief of staff, and a chief of staff gets his power from, in our case, the president, in Egypt's case, the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh is considered a divine whatever the Egyptian system is, so that he always has the right of power. And Joseph's power is contingent upon the Pharaoh's good feelings towards Joseph. Now, Joseph is operating like he's very confident in his powers, but still his power comes from the Pharaoh and it can be withdrawn at any time.
That's interesting. Okay, I want to move on a little bit before we have to stop, because we want to look at Jacob's. Wait, where are we? Okay. So he says, take your households and I will give you the fat of the land. And you are bidden to add, do as follows, take from the land of Egypt wagons for your children and your wives and bring your father here. This is all from Pharaoh. And never mind your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt shall be yours. Wow. He's being very, very generous. Okay, I want to get to Jacob's response to when his sons come back. So who wants to read here? The sons of Israel did so. Somebody, come on. Somebody read, please.
I'll read, and nobody else is reading. I'll read, Susan.
Okay.
I prefer somebody else read. The sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and he supplied them with provisions for the journey. To each of them, moreover, he gave a change of clothing. But to Benjamin, he gave 300 pieces of silver and several, literally 5, changes of clothing.
Okay, here we have that tradition again of having favorites, and giving him money, and because you're my real brother. Also, maybe even though Joseph says, don't be upset that you did this. The only one who wasn't in on it was Benjamin. And so Benjamin gets more. Or maybe it's just because he is symbolic of their mother. But okay, keep going, Miriam.
We also have the theme of clothing, which recurs continuously in this Joseph story. The big deal was that Joseph gets the coat of many colors. He's thrown in the pit and they take off his clothing. Clothing becomes an indication, with the blood on it, of death. He's thrown in the pit. The fine clothing are off. When he goes to Potiphar, he gets better clothing as Potiphar's servant, and even better clothing when he goes to the Pharaoh. And here's clothing again. I mean, I think that's certainly a recurrent thing in the Joseph story.
I think you're right. And clothing obviously has huge significance because your clothes reveal your rank, your status, your importance, your income. Everything was in your clothes. And, the kings and queens of England had diamonds and pearls sewn on their clothes. I mean, so yes, it's very interesting that there's a constant mention of clothing. Okay, so and keep going, Miriam.
He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them.
Oh, no. And To his
Where am I?
father, and to his page 6 on the top, and to his father he sent the following.
Sorry. And to his father, he sent the following 10 he-asses laden with the best things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. And he sent his brothers off on their way. He told them, "Do not be quarrelsome on the way."
Okay, do not be quarrelsome. What does that mean? Don't be quarrelsome, do you think? Brad?
Don't take it out on Benjamin like you did on me.
Oh, that's interesting. Rashi says something else, but I like that too. Rashi says, don't start arguing. Well, you said kill him, you said sell him, you said this, you did that, it's all your fault. He was worried. I mean, these brothers, their characters had changed to some degree, but next week, because I'm teaching next week too, after Jacob dies, now they say, okay, now Joseph is going to give it to us. Now Joseph is going to take his revenge because our father's dead. And because they don't see or can't imagine being as magnanimous as Joseph is being. So he says, do not be quarrelsome on the way. It went away from Egypt, came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. Yes, he's the ruler over the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb, for he did not believe them. So it says in the commentary, because Jacob had been a liar, he could not believe this would be true. He didn't believe it because he had lied. He thought his sons were lying. And they didn't tell him how he survived, or, we have such detail about so many things, but there's no explanation of how did he get to Egypt? What do you mean? I have a daughter who's adopted from Russia. And when she was a little baby, I used to say, I went to Russia and I said, will you be my daughter? And you said, yes. And I adopted you and I brought you home. And then when she was 3 years old, she looked at me and she said, what was I doing there? Like, why was I in Russia? And there's no Jacob here saying, well, how did he get to Egypt? What was he doing in Egypt? How did that happen? Nothing. It's just, he's alive. He's the ruler. Don't ask. They recounted all that Joseph had said to them. And when he saw the wagon, okay, but I'm not clear exactly how much they told. Joseph said to transport him, the spirit of their father, Jacob, revived. And he said, enough, said Israel. My son Joseph is alive. I must go and see him before I die. So, yeah. Yes, Sue.
At this point, do we call Jacob Israel?
Yes, he had that experience when he was a young man, when he was returned to Canaan, before he wrestled with the angel. He had
so he is Israel now. Okay.
Right, so we go back and forth. I don't really know. I guess it would be interesting to do like a paper, a study of when it's Israel and when it's Jacob, and if they have significance in terms of the narrative or something.
That's what my question. Why did they keep going back and forth, basically?
Right. And since next week I'm going to be teaching again, it turns out, I'm going to pick up here before we go to the next Parsha, because here Jacob has a dream, or Israel has a dream. God called to Israel in a vision by night and he said, Jacob, Jacob. So what is that? That's really interesting. And also we're going to see that shepherds were looked down upon in Egypt. And Joseph says, don't tell them, Pharaoh, when you meet him, that you're a shepherd. He actually is a bit ashamed of his country bumpkin brothers, him being the sophisticated Egyptian urbanite that he is. So we should look at that too. So, yes, Nina.
I think the minute that they went down to Egypt, they lost their identity as Israelites. They became a part of the Egypt. They were given a part of the land, and now it's just like, am I Israeli or am I American?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Though. I think it took some time, but I think you're right. But we can talk about that next week. So I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
A pleasure. I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you very much.